Boots are actually pretty complex. They incorporate a number of different materials to provide support and durability, breathability, everything your foot's going to need for a long adventure out in the wild. The first step to understanding what boot to choose is understand what goes into a boot, and that's why we're talking about boot anatomy today. The first piece of boot anatomy actually isn't a part of the boot at all. It's something completely separate. It's called the last. And what it is basically a plastic or wood foot mold that a boot is built around in order to give it its shape, its form, and its fit. A last actually makes a big difference for how a boot's going to feel. Basque has fairly narrow boots with good arch support. Merrell and Garment tend to be sort of average, and Keen tends to be extra wide, and that's because of the last. Upper. The upper is all of what you see here. It can be made of leather, it can be made of plastic or fabric, but it's basically the outside of the boot. Without an upper, you'd be left with a thong. You can see a big difference here. That's the upper. Moving down from the upper, the next component is the outsole. The outsole on this boot is black. It's made of Vibram rubber. That's what gives you grip to a trail. It gives you strength in the bottom of the boot, lifts the boot up a little ways. This is a pretty heavy-duty hiking boot, and its outsole has fairly large lugs that are going to wear more slowly over time. They're going to hold up better as you go out for hikes and you walk on concrete. This is a little bit of a lighter hiking boot. It's a low top, and you can see the lugs they're smaller, they're more narrow, and this isn't going to last as long, but it might perform a little bit better with less weight. Working our way up from the bottom of the boot and the outsole, the next layer is the midsole. Here it's made of EVA, here it's made of polyurethane. If you see an EVA midsole, that's going to give you some cushion, it's going to be lighter. You see this a lot on running shoes, and it can get packed down over time. Over the course of a year and a half or a couple years, the midsole on this shoe is going to start to wear out. If you have a polyurethane midsole like this boot has, it's going to last 5, maybe even 8 years if the rest of the boot holds up. You can tell the difference on them because EVA is squishier, and it also tends to have these little wrinkles over time. Even when you buy it new, you can probably see a little bit more wrinkling going on, and it really feels like foam, whereas this feels like rubber. Moving forward, the next two pieces of the boot are the Achilles notch on the back here. You can see this little mark down here, and that is designed for your Achilles tendon to run up through the boot, because if this was flat, you'd be putting a lot of pressure on the Achilles tendon, and that's going to hurt after a while. Especially on high top boots, you want to make sure there's a good Achilles notch and make sure it doesn't hurt your foot. The next piece of boot anatomy is the rocker, and you can imagine that if this was flat, you'd have to walk like a robot, you know, walking around kind of like this, and your ankles would have to do all the work. But by having a little bit of a rolling shape here at the bottom of the boot on the rocker area, you're going to smooth out the ride. And especially on high top, stiffer hiking boots that don't bend as much in the toe area, rocker's very important. This here is the rubber band, and even though it doesn't exactly look like a rubber band to me, I would call it a toe cap personally. What this does is add durability to the toe of a boot, another layer of waterproofing. It's just going to help it last longer. These are the lugs, and you can see on this higher end hiking boot the lugs are fairly thick and robust, and that's going to last longer as you walk around. It's not going to wear out quite as quickly. It's okay to have something that's a little thicker and beefier because you may be carrying extra weight, and that's going to add extra force, which is going to be dispersed through those lugs. This lighter hiking boot, the lugs are a lot narrower and smaller, and they will wear out faster, but that's going to give you more grip when you aren't carrying a pack. So the lug pattern on a boot is actually kind of important. If you see a hiking boot that has a lot of slices and real narrow patterns on the bottom and the lugs are very tiny, just know that that may wear out a little bit faster. The next piece of the boot is the heel, and much like a woman's high-heeled shoe that's elevated, hiking boots have this heel shape, and what that does is provide you stopping power and more grip to the trail as you're sliding down forward. Notches are little ridges cut into the heel and toe areas of the boot that are designed for step-in crampons. Sometimes for snowshoes if you're looking at a waterproof, more of a snow boot design. What you see here in the purple is an exoskeleton. And what that does is provides extra support and rigidity throughout the boot. When you pull on the laces, it's really pulling on these pieces of the exoskeleton. And on this shoe in particular, it's very important because otherwise it's really just mesh and you kind of end up with a water shoe. So just like a bug has an exoskeleton to kind of protect it and give it strength, shoes have exoskeletons sometimes to give them strength and protection. The next piece is the insole. So you can see it right in there inside this shoe. There's the insole on this shoe. Here is a Superfeet, and what this is a replacement insole. So the insole is what actually comes into contact with the bottom of your foot. When you decide to upgrade, or maybe you're replacing your insole, just remember that you want it to fit the curve of your foot, and just because it's hard doesn't mean that you're not going to get some cushion, because that's going to come from other parts of the boot. It's called the heel counter. You can't actually see it, but it's built into the heel on, well, not in this shoe. This is actually a great example of having no heel counter. You can squish it down completely. But these skateboarding shoes, this hiking boot, this other hiking boot, they all have a heel counter, which is a plastic cup designed to give it strength and support. The next part of a boot's anatomy is the liner, which is the fabric and foam on the inside of the boot that comes into contact with your foot. What that's doing is providing padding, and it's giving you more comfort than anything, I would say, because this is where the boot actually comes into contact with your foot. Sometimes over extended use of a hiking boot, you end up with a liner that wears out and you start to get, actually this shoe has it, you start to get, you can see the foam in there and you can actually see the heel counter, and sometimes that rubs on your foot and may even cause bleeding, that kind of thing. So take care of your liner. I'm doing something terrible here, which is I'm not untying my shoe when putting it on, I'm just popping it on, but as you can see, that causes damage over time, so take care of your liner. Membrane, this is another piece of the boot that you can't actually see, and it's quite curious. People are always asking about Gore-Tex and Event and things like that, and they think, oh, that's something that's on the outside. Does this boot have Gore-Tex? You can't actually see it. It's inside of the upper and the liner. It's a layer, if you imagine sort of like a bag that's sewn in that will keep the boot from leaking, that's what these membranes do. And Gore-Tex in particular is a membrane that allows you to vent as your foot gets hot, and that helps to keep your foot cool, but it also keeps water out, so it's sort of a one-way permeable membrane. The last two features of a boot's anatomy are the tongue and the tongue gusset. The tongue is basically another piece of padding here designed to help the boot fit to different types of shoes. If you have a really tall foot, the tongue can extend like this and the lacing can still be tight. If you have a shorter foot, the tongue tucks in and allows the rest of the boot to mold around your foot. It allows the exoskeleton to kind of pull in. So, you know, we all know what a tongue is, but what's not quite as obvious is the tongue gusset, and you can see it right here. It's this little flap of fabric that connects the tongue to the upper, and that's a really important feature, especially if you're getting a high top boot. You need to remember that it's only going to be waterproof as high as the tongue gusset goes, because once water gets up here, it's going to be able to leak in through the sides like that. So there's the tongue gusset. It's kind of a trade-off because you want it to be loose enough and low enough that you can actually get your foot into the boot, but you want it to be high enough that it's going to keep out debris, dust, dirt, all of those things. So earlier we talked a little bit about what makes a good hiking boot. You want something that's going to feel good and give you some support, and that kind of depends on the last that the boot was built around. If you remember, again, the last is sort of the model that they build boots around at the factory. Make sure it feels good. That's the first piece. That's key. And then make sure you have a good pair of socks. Tighten the boot up, and if you've gotten the right thing, if you're going on a light hike, you're going to have something that's fairly flexible, fairly breathable. If you're going on an adventure trek, you probably have something stiffer and taller. But in any case, it should be tight around your foot, and you should have great socks to go with it. Everyone's feet are different, and out on the trail, especially if you're going a long distance and maybe you haven't been hiking regularly, your foot may bleed, you may get blisters, so always bring some extra band-aids and an extra pair of socks. Try to keep your feet dry, and have a great time on the trail. Thanks. For more great outdoor content, head on over to h1ker.com. Hiker.